All right, so today we're going to be doing a deep dive into how to sound more natural when you speak English.
Okay.
We've got some great material to work with.
Yeah.
We've got an article here focusing on like 10 specific strategies, another article focusing on linking words together.
Right.
And then we even have a transcript from a pronunciation expert's lesson.
Awesome.
So
Sounds
you
good.
should be able to get through quite a bit.
Yeah. I'm really excited to dive into all this stuff. It seems like there's so much advice out there
Yeah.
for people who want to improve their English. Yeah. And a lot of it goes way beyond just like losing the accent or,
Right.
producing an accent. It's about how to really think in English.
Yeah.
And use vocabulary powerfully and really project confidence. It's a whole other level.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I noticed that one of the sources kind of breaks it down
Yeah.
into 3 key areas. It talked about grammar, vocal skills, and vocabulary.
Right.
It's almost like they're saying that even if your grammar isn't perfect, other things matter more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's really reassuring for a lot of English learners because, so many people get caught up
Right.
in trying to be grammatically perfect. But think of someone like Emmanuel Macron.
Yeah.
He has a very distinct accent when he speaks English, but he's clearly fluent and he commands respect.
Right.
So it's not about erasing your background. It's about communicating effectively.
I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, so that is reassuring because I think, if you're learning a language and you're trying to, reach a high level of proficiency, you kind of get in your head about grammar.
Yeah.
But this article does say that having a solid grasp of grammar does help you sound more advanced.
It does.
So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think grammar is important. It's like the scaffolding of a building,
Okay.
You don't necessarily see it in the finished product, but it's essential for structural integrity.
Okay.
So, for example, have you ever wondered why we sometimes say had?
I'll be honest. Yeah. I mean, it always seems a little odd when I hear it or when I read it, but I don't
Right.
really, think about it too much. I just kind of let it slide.
But that's the past perfect tense.
Right.
And once you understand why it's used, you start to see those patterns everywhere.
Okay.
And it's not about memorizing rules. It's about understanding the logic behind them.
So I guess what you're saying is that instead of just glossing over grammar rules,
Yeah.
I should be kind of digging deeper into the why behind them, be a language detective.
Exactly. That kind of active learning is far more effective than rote memorization.
I like that. Okay, cool. So let's talk about the sound of it all, pronunciation.
Yes.
This source that we have really stresses the importance of nailing those individual sounds, especially the ones that kind of trip up non-native speakers.
Yeah.
And they even mention this thing called minimal pairs,
Yes.
which sounds like a pretty targeted approach.
It is. So basically, let's say you struggle with the difference between sheep and chip.
Okay.
Minimal pairs isolate those tricky sounds and force you to really hear and practice the distinction.
Okay.
So it's about working smarter, not just harder.
So if I know that I tend to mix up certain vowel sounds,
Yes.
I could focus on, minimal pairs just for those sounds.
Exactly.
Instead of trying to practice everything at once.
Precisely.
It's like laser focus training.
Yes. And once you've mastered those sounds,
Okay.
then you can start to focus on the rhythm of English.
Okay.
This is where things get really fascinating.
All right.
Because English is a stressed timed language,
Right.
which means that the rhythm is determined by the stressed syllables in a sentence.
Yeah, and I remember reading about that, like how desert, the dry place, and dessert, the sweet treat, are spelled almost the same.
Right.
But the stress changes the meaning entirely. It's almost musical.
It is.
It is.
And this stress-timed rhythm leads to something called chunking, which is how native speakers group words together to create those natural pauses and flow.
I see.
Do you remember the classic, "The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain"?
Oh, yeah. That one really gets you.
Yeah.
If you pause in the wrong places, it sounds so unnatural.
Exactly. Chunking helps you find those natural breaks in a sentence,
Right.
making your speech more fluid and less robotic.
Okay, so we're pronouncing the individual sounds correctly. We're using rhythm and chunking.
Right.
But how do we actually become more fluent?
Right.
That
Right.
effortless kind of speaking that everyone dreams of.
Well, one of the sources actually suggests something that you might especially appreciate
Okay.
as a podcast enthusiast.
All right.
They recommend listening to podcasts with transcripts
Okay.
because it lets you see how the host chunks their speech, where they pause, how they use intonation.
That's a great idea. I mean, it's like you have a
Yeah.
pronunciation roadmap right there in front of you.
Exactly.
And I can totally see how mimicking those elements could help with fluency.
Absolutely. It's about training your ear and your mind to follow the natural flow of English speech.
Cool. Okay, so let's move on to vocabulary.
All right.
I love how one source points out that using precise language
Yes.
trumps sounding overly formal. It's not about showing off, big words, but about choosing the right words.
Exactly. And, think about the word globalization.
Yeah.
It packs so much meaning into a single word.
Right.
It replaces a whole sentence about interconnectedness and international trends.
Right.
It's efficient and it's impactful.
It's like each word has its own weight and its own purpose.
But it does.
I actually started keeping a vocabulary notebook.
Oh, nice.
Where I just write down interesting words that I come across.
I love that.
It's like my own little personal arsenal of expression.
Like a fantastic habit.
Thing.
It shows you're actively engaging with the language and expanding your expressive range.
Awesome.
And while we're on the topic of interesting words, we can't forget about idioms.
Oh, yeah.
They can add color and personality to your speech.
Right.
But they also come with a warning label.
Yeah, because you can't always figure out what they mean just by looking at the individual words.
Exactly.
Like, raining cats and dogs doesn't literally mean felines and canines falling from the sky.
Exactly. It's a figurative expression, and you have to learn its meaning as a whole unit.
Right.
Idioms are like cultural puzzles.
Right.
And understanding them adds a whole new dimension to your fluency.
It's like a whole nother language.
It is, in a way.
Within the language.
Yes.
Okay. And then there are those sneaky phrasal verbs.
Yes.
Which can trip you up even if you know the individual words.
Right.
It's easy to overlook them because they don't always follow the rules of logic.
For instance, take the phrasal verb wear off.
Okay.
It means for something to gradually disappear or lose its effect.
Okay.
You wouldn't necessarily guess that just by looking at the words wear and off separately.
Yeah, those are the ones that really make you think.
Yes.
Oh.
But mastering them can unlock a whole new level of naturalness and fluency.
Right, because it allows you to express yourself in a more concise and idiomatic way.
Exactly. Which is how native speakers naturally communicate.
Okay, cool. So we've covered pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, fluency. I feel like we're forgetting something. What are we forgetting?
Well, we can't forget about the role of confidence.
Oh, right. Confidence. That's right. The pronunciation expert that we have the transcript from actually emphasizes that confidence can be like a secret weapon for sounding more natural.
It is, because you can imagine someone who knows all the right words and grammar rules.
Right.
But they mumble and avoid eye contact.
Right.
They might be understood, but they won't sound natural or confident.
Right.
Confidence is like the glue that holds it all together.
So it's like that saying, fake it till you make it. Even if you're not 100% confident yet, projecting an air of confidence can actually help you sound more fluent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as you improve in all these other areas, pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, your confidence naturally grows. So it creates this positive feedback loop.
Okay. So we've got pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, fluency, confidence. Is there anything else we need to consider?
Well, there is one more thing.
Okay.
And it's something that I think often gets overlooked.
Okay.
Think about this. How much emphasis is placed on clear articulation in your native language?
That's a good question. I'm going to have to think about that one.
Yeah, it's fascinating to consider because sometimes trying to be overly clear in English can actually make you sound less natural.
Oh, interesting.
It's about finding that sweet spot between clarity and the natural flow of spoken English.
Okay. Now, things are getting really interesting. I want to dig deeper into that.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good place to pause for now.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
But we will be back very soon to continue our exploration of how to sound more natural when you speak English.
Looking forward to it.
So, I was thinking about what you said before about how emphasizing clarity in English can sometimes make you sound less natural.
Yeah.
It seems kind of counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you think about it.
It is. It's one of those subtle things that can really make a difference because if you over-enunciate everything, it can sound a little stiff and formal, like you're reading from a textbook.
Yeah. Yeah. And that reminds me of something else I read in one of these sources about the power of sentence starters.
Oh, yeah?
It's not just about what you say, but how you introduce it.
It's true. Those little phrases can actually add a lot to your fluency.
Yeah.
Think about words like actually, or, as a matter of fact, they signal a shift in thought or a bit of emphasis, and they create a more natural conversational flow.
Right. It's almost like adding punctuation to your spoken language.
It is.
Instead of just jumping from one idea to the next, you're kind of guiding the listener along. And it makes it a more engaging experience.
Yeah. And once you're comfortable with those subtle cues, you can start to play around with more colorful language.
Okay.
Have you ever thought about how strong adjectives can really amp up your expressiveness?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I remember one of the articles gave the example of replacing very beautiful with stunning or breathtaking.
Yes.
Which just paints a much more vivid picture in the listener's mind.
Exactly. It's about choosing words that evoke a stronger emotional response.
Right.
And don't forget about adverbs, too. Instead of saying very quickly, you could say rapidly or swiftly. It adds a level of precision and color to your language.
So it's like upgrading your vocabulary from basic to premium.
Exactly.
I like it. And I love how it doesn't require adding any extra words.
Right.
It's just about swapping out weaker choices for more powerful ones.
Precisely.
It strikes me that all of these techniques that we're talking about, from pronunciation and rhythm to vocabulary choices, are not just about sounding more native-like.
That's a great point.
They're really about becoming a more effective communicator overall.
I think that's a brilliant observation.
Right.
Because when you're comfortable with the nuances of language, you can really focus on conveying your message with clarity and impact.
Right. It's about wielding language as a tool to connect with others.
Yes.
And express yourself authentically.
Exactly.
And I imagine that feeling of mastery can do wonders for your confidence.
It does.
Especially if you're still, working on becoming more fluent.
Yeah, confidence is definitely a key ingredient. And one thing that can really help is shifting your focus away from perfection.
Okay.
And towards progress.
Okay.
Celebrate those small wins along the way.
I love that, because it's so easy to get discouraged when you're still making mistakes.
It is.
But it's important to acknowledge how far you've come.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every time you nail a tricky pronunciation, or you learn a new idiom, or you have a conversation without feeling totally lost, take a moment to appreciate that progress. Those small victories build momentum.
Right.
And keep you motivated to keep learning.
And let's be honest, even native speakers make mistakes.
Oh, of course.
Fluency isn't about speaking perfectly.
Right.
It's about communicating effectively and confidently, even if you stumble occasionally.
Exactly. It's about embracing the journey and not letting the fear of making mistakes hold you back.
Right.
The more you practice, the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
So speaking of practice, I was wondering if maybe we could dive into a specific example.
I think that's a great idea.
That really brings all of these techniques together.
Yeah,
just to kind of see how it works in a real world scenario.
Let's do it.
All right. So let's say you're telling someone about a recent trip you took.
Okay.
Okay.
Instead of saying, my trip was very good, try using a more evocative adjective.
Okay.
Think fantastic, unforgettable, even eye-opening, depending on the experience.
All right. So let's go with fantastic.
Okay.
My trip was absolutely fantastic.
Perfect. Now let's add a sentence starter to introduce the next thought.
Okay.
Instead of just listing activities, you could say something like, as a matter of fact, one of the highlights was.
Okay. So my trip was absolutely fantastic. As a matter of fact, one of the highlights was hiking to a breathtaking waterfall.
Beautiful.
Wow. That already sounds so much more fluent and engaging.
It does. And notice how you naturally emphasized the word breathtaking.
Yeah.
You're using those strong adjectives to paint a more vivid picture for the listener.
Right. It's like I'm not just giving them information. I'm sharing an experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the more you practice weaving these elements together, the more natural and effortless it will become.
It's funny how all of these seemingly small details have such a big impact on how you sound.
They do.
It's not just about learning grammar rules and vocabulary. It's about understanding the music and the flow of the language.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's like learning to play an instrument. You need to practice the scales and the techniques.
Right.
But ultimately, it's about creating something beautiful and expressive.
And that brings us back to the idea of confidence.
Yes.
The more comfortable you are with these techniques, the more confident you'll feel using them.
It's a virtuous cycle.
It is.
It's about owning your voice and expressing yourself authentically.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the ultimate goal for any language learner.
It's not about erasing your accent or trying to sound exactly like a native speaker.
Right.
It's about finding your own unique voice within the language.
Precisely. It's about embracing the diversity and richness of language and using it to connect with others in a meaningful way.
This has been such an insightful conversation.
I'm glad to hear that.
I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the art of speaking English naturally.
Me too. And I hope you, our listener, feel the same way.
You know, it's amazing how all these, like, seemingly small things that we've talked about, like sentence starters, strong adjectives, even the way we think about clarity.
Right.
It can all add up to such a big difference in how natural we sound when we speak English.
It really does. It's like we're piecing together a puzzle. Each element contributes to that overall picture of fluency and naturalness.
And you know what I'm realizing is that it's not just about mimicking native speakers.
Right.
It's about understanding the underlying principles of how the language works and then applying them in a way that feels authentic to you.
That's such a crucial point. Because there's no one right way to sound natural in English.
Right.
It's about finding your own voice within the language.
Yeah.
Embracing your unique accent and personality.
Yeah. Like we were talking about earlier with Emmanuel Macron.
Exactly.
He's a great example of someone who speaks English confidently and effectively, even with a noticeable accent.
Yes. It's about owning your voice and not being afraid to let your personality shine through.
Yeah.
That's what makes language truly captivating.
Right.
The ability to express your unique perspective and connect with others on a human level.
And that brings us back to the idea of confidence.
Yes.
It just seems like confidence plays such a huge role in how natural we sound.
It does. It allows you to relax and be yourself and let the language flow.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing is that confidence builds upon itself. The more you practice, the more comfortable you become.
Right.
And the more confident you sound.
So it's not just about reaching a certain level of fluency and then suddenly you feel confident. It's like an ongoing process.
Exactly.
A journey of continuous improvement.
It is. It's about embracing those challenges and the joys of language learning.
Yeah.
Knowing that every step you take is bringing you closer to your goal.
Right.
And remember, the goal isn't perfection.
Yeah.
It's about communicating effectively and authentically.
And I think that's a really important message for anyone who's feeling, you know, discouraged or overwhelmed by the process of learning English.
It is.
Yeah.
It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to stumble over your words.
Right.
The key is to keep practicing, keep learning, and keep pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone.
Right.
That's where the real growth happens.
This whole deep dive has been such an eye-opener for me.
Good.
I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on what it means to speak English naturally.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And I hope you, our listener, feel the same way.
So to wrap things up, remember that the journey to fluency is a marathon, not a sprint.
That's right.
Celebrate the small victories, embrace the challenges,
Yes.
and most importantly, have fun along the way.
And never stop exploring the beauty and power of the English language.
Yeah.
There's always something new to discover.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a truly enriching experience.
The pleasure was all mine. And to you, our listener, keep learning, keep growing, and keep sharing your voice with the world.
Until next time, happy language learning.